Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody noticed that I used the ramp walking up here, safety first. Yesterday, we started out with the acting secretary. Today, we're starting out with me. I think, Pat, you're kind of moving down a little bit here, so I'll try my best. I think that the secretary's comments yesterday, if you were here and you heard them, were right on target. And although I can't say them as well as he could, especially from somebody who happens to have a law degree from Harvard and a master's in literature from Oxford, I'll just simply say ditto to everything that he says. Okay, I think he was exactly on target. I'm going to talk a little bit about the EM program at a pretty high level. Roger Claycombe's got a presentation later on in the day. He's going to go into a little more detail. In EM, our work plan and control program, we have some warts, we've got some ugly babies, we also have some good-looking babies. So I'll briefly go through some of the things that our folks have been seeing, and I'll leave you with a couple thoughts before I turn it over to Jim McConnell. Let me see if I can work this thing. Speaking of ugly babies, no, actually, no, please don't tell them I said that, okay? These are the key members of our staff that you will see at EM sites doing work plan and control reviews. I think most of these names are well known to the group. As you can tell, these guys are senior. They've been doing this stuff for a long time. You'll also probably see them at some of the NNSA sites helping out with, ORRs or RAs, that type of reviews. But these are the key players that we have in EM in the area of work planning control, at least from a headquarters perspective. Okay, I am going to steal a quote from Jim McConnell that I hear him use quite often. What's important to my boss is fascinating to me, right? Okay, so how does the EM boss, both Dave Huizinga and Tracy Mustin, communicate the importance of work planning and control down through our organization? And this is just a couple of the tools that they use. We continue to place a lot of emphasis on our annual ISM QA effectiveness reviews, and we have focus areas in that. And for the last few years, work planning and control has been one of those focus areas that we continue to place a lot of emphasis on. The second area is in our actual metrics, our FY13 performance agreement, where we establish both metrics for our cleanup activities as well as for safety, work planning and control. And we have a specific one related to both implementation and evaluation of work planning and control. And these metrics flow down throughout the senior manager's performance plans, and that's how our leadership helps to enforce the fact that they think this is important. Okay, so I'll talk about the good things, and let me say again that these are not my observations, although I could probably pick up a lot of them as I read event reports every morning, but these are from the group of guys that I mentioned earlier. And some of the good things that we've been seeing, programmatically, things are getting better. That shouldn't be any surprise. I think we heard a lot of that yesterday. Our work control documents are getting better. And our contractors are doing a better job of actually evaluating their programs at the various sites. But given that, we also have quite a few weaknesses. These are our ugly babies. And what's amazing is these are very similar to what was discussed yesterday, especially in Steve DeMotor's presentation. We're seeing a lot of the same things. The first one, we still struggle with clearly identifying the task in the work package. What are the boundaries of the work? Is this going to be skill of the craft? How much, how much leeway does the actual worker have? Periodically, we don't identify all the hazards. The third one, tailoring of hazard control specific to the activity. In EM, when we're a D&D type activity, for long-term work plan control elements, as you eliminate or reduce hazards, we're not very good at controlling specifically how we are going to reduce the controls as we go through that process. We're still struggling with that in some areas. We don't always identify all the controls necessary to protect us from the hazards, and when we do identify them, we don't always implement them correctly. Come on. There we go. Okay, planners seem to always catch the brunt of the criticism in work planning and control, but it is a team activity. You have to have subject matter experts, you have to have workers involved. We still see a lot of that across the EM complex, and finger pointing to our planners. We still are not always incorporating our hazard controls into our work control documents. Sometimes our action steps, our work instructions are not, you can't execute them as written, and that leads to people trying to do workarounds, especially in this time when we are facing some severe fiscal constraints, a lot of pressure on our workforce to get things done. So we have to make sure that we put the best package possible in their hands when they go out to the field to do work. Our review and approval process, the V&V. A lot of people believe that just simply doing a tabletop is going to save you time. And over we see that is not the case, that in fact, you do a tabletop, you go out, you can't start the work for one reason or another, you don't have the right tools, the steps can't be executed as written for one thing or another. So we tend to use tabletops a little bit too frequently. We talked yesterday about first line supervision and how important they are to improving work planning control. And we still have some weak first line supervisors. Examples are my folks will be watching work in the field. They'll have the first line supervisor standing right next to them. The worker will be getting ready to start a job with the wrong PPE on, or following a procedure and getting ready to do steps out of sequence, and the supervisor won't say anything. So the supervisors have to be the ones that are reinforcing expectations in the areas of what we want our workers to do. And then we have a relatively mature workforce, so sometimes it's difficult for them to understand the degree of formality that we're expecting in this day and age in the area of work planning control. Now, you hear about all these issues, and like many of you, I've been doing this a long time. And I kind of feel like I could have written this brief about 10 years ago, and I mentioned that to Steve yesterday. I mean, we keep seeing the same type of comments. So I raised the question to some of my folks, well, are we even getting any better? You know, are things improving? And the answer was yes, we are getting better, okay? And where we're seeing that is when we identify issues, the significance of those issues is not as great as we used to see. You know, an example would be a work control document, maybe a step is out of sequence or something is missing from that. 10 years ago, the comment would have been there was no work control document for this job. So, you know, the relative magnitude of the issues that we're seeing is significantly smaller. But we still have a ways to go. And I wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I think that's going to lead into what Jim's going to have to say to you. We spend a lot of time talking about integrated safety management at the activity level. Well, I firmly believe you have to move it down even another level, and it has to be at the personal level. We're talking about cultural issues here. When you read events, you know, occurrence reports, you know, how many times could that event have been prevented by the worker just simply stopping, saying, do I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing? You know, do I know all the hazards that I'm going to be exposed to? Do I know what controls are protecting me? Or controls that are protecting the plant from me, as Dan Bullen said yesterday when he was talking. Are those controls actually in place before we go forward and do the work? The second element in there, I said audacity. And that really what I'm getting at is kind of a fearless boldness to raise issues when you come to them from our workforce. They have to be able to stand up and say, this work package will not work. We haven't identified all the hazards. They have to be able to do that, and that's why I say they have to have a certain degree of audacity to be able to do that, given the pressures that they're under all the time. And it's significant, and we see that out in the complex. And then I'm very good at taking quotes from other people. This one happens to come from Frank McCoy, but he said, there is no such thing as routine work. And I firmly believe that. Very frequently we see events where people say, well, we do it all the time. You know, we've done it this way for the last 20 years, and something is a little bit different. So it's important that we don't treat our jobs as routine work. And with that, I am going to wrap up my comments. And Pat, if you wanted to call Jim up, or you want me to just have him come up? I do have time for questions, sure, if anyone has any.
Okay, let's unmute the remotes, okay? Any questions in the auditorium or any of the remote sites? This is your time. Don't complain later.
So enthralled, I know, that was it, right? Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. You mentioned in the fiscal conditions that we're operating under and how that leads to pressure on the workforce to get the job done. How is EM transmitting the message down through the contractors and to the workforce that if we can't afford to do the job right, we can't afford to do the job?
Well, I think that really gets back to a lot of the work we're doing in the area of safety culture and safety conscious work environment. I mean, we have spent a lot of time focusing right now at the senior manager level, right? Because when you read the definition of safety culture, it clearly starts at the top, laying out the expectations of behavior, moving it down. But from a SKIWI perspective, you know, the ability of a person to raise issues without any fear of retaliation, I think as we emphasize that, it reinforces the fact that if they are under a certain amount of pressure and they don't think something is right, they shouldn't fear raising that issue. So I think that's how we're starting to push it down into our workforce and get at it. That.
Hi. How are you getting around the fact that you have very mature workforce and they are used to doing things in a certain way over the last 4 or 5 decades? And now you come this new process. How is it filtering down? What's your mechanism to try to educate them?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it really is. And I know some of the other folks are going to talk about that very topic later on today. But I think it gets down to we've got to get our first line supervisors on board. I mean, they are the ones that have to set the expectations for what level of formality our craft people are going to be following. And that is a hard thing to do. That's what we're struggling with. It's both them reinforcing that and then the cultural issue that I mentioned before. Yep.
Hi, this is Mary Hoey, HSS. Many of you know that I'm involved in the differing professional opinion process, and this is an add-on to the discussion on people on fear of harassment. The feedback that we've had, and it's spotty because people don't actually come to us and give us much directly, is that people tend to be more worried about not the obvious retaliation, like being fired, but more the less obvious retaliation like being ostracized from the organization, getting less important work to do, those types of things. Don Nichols, who is one of the DPO managers right now, is initiating an effort to try to get back to the people who have used the DPO process and find out what kind of a response they had and try to encourage it. And we've talked a lot about trying to celebrate those people who have the courage to come forward. I think that's true in all levels of work, because I think people really do resist asking their managers for more information, resisting routine work without double-checking things, unless they feel comfortable that their manager is not going to react negatively to them.
I think that's a great comment, and I certainly hope that Don is working with Chip Lagden, who runs the EM DPO program as well, on that subject. So I don't know for sure, but I would hope so.
Not that I've heard of yet, but I'll pass it back to Chip.
Yeah, that would be great. Appreciate it. Nothing like tasking one of your fellow workers, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.